Well, thank you so much to all of you who are in attendance here, and to our panelists for our first public workshop, our Marin LAFCo Shared Services Workshop. And we typically do an annual workshop that's a little bit more internally focused, but this year we decided, because staff has really moved us forward so well, that we can really do more of an outreach type workshop. And we decided to focus on shared services and consolidation and how it's been working in the county. So Olivia will give us a little housekeeping and then we'll get started.
So how to participate, this is mostly directed at our attendees. You can use the chat window for questions during each panel because this is a webinar seminar. The Q&A should be at the bottom panel along Zoom, and you can just submit questions. And although other attendees will be able to see questions, the panelists will be able to see questions and will be able to select questions to answer from that chat box. If you have any technical difficulties, we all know Zoom can be finicky. Send an email to staff@marinlafco.org and we can help you out. We have a staff member who will be monitoring emails just in case there ends up being any problems, you get kicked off of the Zoom, anything of that sort. And then we will take a break between panels to stretch and go to the restroom. But if you have to step away from your computer and come back, that's completely fine as well.
Thank you, Olivia. Here's how we kind of imagine the flow going. If there are more questions and we need to go a little bit longer on either of the two panels, we are open to doing that. We just wanted to give you a start and an end time so that people who were choosing to attend only one panel could have that knowledge. But please feel free to ask questions in the chat, as Olivia mentioned. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So thank you so much. The commission is happy to host this workshop, and I'm the commission chairman, Jason Freed, who I think you all know as the executive director. We have Jaren Seibel also on, who is our deputy executive director, and we have Olivia Gingold, who is our clerk and junior analyst. And wanted to thank our partners who helped get the word out about this workshop, MCCMC, the Marin County Council of Mayors and Council Members, to the Marin County Special Districts Association and the Marin County Office of Education. Although school districts are not under the purview of LAFCo, we all do share the same audience. And so it was great to have them as a partner in getting the word out about the workshop. So thank you to all three of our partners. So I'm just going to kick us off by talking about why consider shared services. We're particularly in a time like now when budgets are constrained, revenues are a little bit constrained. Now is a perfect time to consider shared services. I know a lot of the cities and towns, the city managers have been talking about this for some time, some special districts as well. But let's talk about why you might consider a shared services arrangement. There is, of course, the sharing of costs. There are some opportunities to create job depth and specialization. If you have one person shared across multiple organizations or multiple people shared across multiple organizations, you can create that specialization. You have an opportunity to look at ways to align operations, and you can identify potential issues that might get in the way if you are considering consolidation. And then you can also develop relationships. Next slide, please. And the reason we're having this workshop today is to talk about how LAFCo can help in this. LAFCO is, as I like to say, a slow boil organization. We like to get involved 5 to 10 years ahead of when we actually would need to approve a consolidation or any other type of reorganization. So involving LAFCO early and often will save you time and money in the future. And ways you can get LAFCO involved is having staff attend your strategic planning sessions, your general plan meetings, and any working groups. And sometimes we convene working groups as a result of our municipal service reviews, but always think of LAFCO as a neutral convener. We do not have a dog in the fight. We are a neutral place to convene a conversation. Next slide, please. And wanted to point out that LAFCO is neutral. We do not have a particular bent of wanting things to go one way or the other. Our interest is really in service efficiency, current and future, as projected out by the future of the jurisdiction, the financial stability, and compliance with state and local laws. Next slide. And now Jason will give us a little LAFCO 101.
Thank you, Chair McEntee. So LAFCo stands for Local Agency Formation Commission. It is something that was created by the state legislature in 1963 as a way originally to deal with jurisdictional issues, like every time a city wanted to expand its boundaries or a special district wanted to expand its boundaries, it used to go through the state legislative process. Can you imagine today, every person who has a septic tank that's trying to get off of their septic tank onto the sewer system and even be annexed in, having that individual parcel need its own piece of legislation and going through the state legislature, it would have been a nightmare. In the 50s, the state was expanding so much, they realized it was starting to become a problem. So they created LAFCOs as a way to try and deal with these local issues to do that. Over the years, LAFCOs have changed quite a bit. They've added quite a bit to our services. But the original orientation was, how do we deal with the expansion of all these cities and special districts in all the counties across the state? Each county has a LAFCO. But each LAFCO works differently in some ways because we're geared towards what is the needs of the local community. We're not, while we have to follow state government code, we also try and do our best to make sure that we're doing the needs of the local community at the same time. So that's why every LAFCO is made up of commissioners who come from the community itself. We have, in Marin's case, we have 2 county supervisors, 2 members that are represent the cities, 2 representatives from special districts, and then those folks pick a person who represents the general public as a whole. And that's how each LAFCO gets made up. Outside of the boundary changes, we also do something called municipal service reviews, or MSRs. And that's to look at to make sure that local governments are working and functioning correctly. They also, while we're not like the financial auditors, we do other stuff as well to just to make sure that everything is running smoothly, and like no cities are going to be going bankrupt. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, I guess, with panel 1. We'll be a few minutes early, but hopefully panel 1's ready to go.
Jason, it looks like the question was answered by Jaron in the chat, but do you want to just briefly talk about why school districts are not covered by LAFCO? It looks like there's another question. Are LAFCO service review procedures or criteria that would be applicable or useful models for school districts?
Yes, so LAFCO does not cover school districts because the state legislature never gave us the authority to do so. And that goes back to 1963. When we were doing jurisdictional issues, I was, to be perfectly fair, not yet born in 63, so I can't tell you why the state legislature made the decision back then, but they made that decision and it has never gone back and reneged on that issue. So the school districts have their own process for determining whose boundaries they are. And the other part of the question was, the shared services actually can go between schools and special districts and cities. So this discussion we're having today can be useful for anybody because all governments could have some potential use. And you're actually going to see an example later on during a panel 1, I believe it is, where there is a school district and a city, actually 2 cities that came together to create a rec and park district, or rec and park services, I should say. So it shows that even though school districts are not under the LAFCO umbrella, they are government, and all governments can work together in different ways. And there are shared services, no matter what type of government you are, that will allow you to share your services together.
And I'll just add that there's also an opportunity for school districts and either cities or towns or special districts to look at facilities sharing as appropriate, where you share, where you have adjacent properties. There are some conversations going on in the county about related to microgrid and energy resilience type projects as facilities projects come up. So that's not in the LAFCO area, but it's yet another way to think creatively about how to collaborate between these agencies. Okay, we will then go ahead, as Jason said a couple minutes earlier, and jump into panel 1, exploring successful shared services and consolidation models in Marin. So we wanted to just give you an overview of some shared services and consolidation models that are already working in Marin, and give you an idea of how these groups got started and how they kind of came to the path that led them to where they are today. So we have three panelists for you today. We have Bob McCaskill, who's a former council member of the city of Belvedere, who's going to talk about the ranch and their yellow school bus JPA. We have Todd Cusimano, the city manager or the town manager, I'm sorry, of Corte Madera, and who was going to talk about Central Marin Police Authority and Central Marin Fire Department. And we have Michael Frank, the executive officer of Marin General Services Authority. And he is going to be able to tell you a little bit about yet a different way of managing government services that he is responsible for. So thank you to my three panelists for being here today. I'm going to have you each start out by introducing yourself and talking about the services your agency provides, and we'll just have you each do a quick run through. I think some of you have some slides. We'll start with Bob McCaskill.
Good morning, Sashi. Do you want me to go through and cover both of the JPAs that I was going to talk about today, or do you just want an introductory comment at this point?
Let's just do an introductory comment and talk about just tell me what services each of those JPAs provides.
Okay. Belvedere, the city of Belvedere and the town of Tiburon, perhaps not surprisingly, have a few shared services because we're two of the smaller cities in the county. The two that Sashi asked me to talk about today are one, our joint recreation JPA, which is known locally as the Ranch, and the other is a newer JPA, the Tiburon Peninsula Traffic Relief JPA. I'll just quickly start with just the history of why they were created. Our joint recreation JPA serves as the joint recreation department for both cities. It's been around for over 50 years. It was formed back in 1975, strangely enough, at the behest of the Reunion School District, because due to Proposition 13 related cutbacks in school funding at that time, the school was having to cut back on its afternoon sports programs for youth. And so we perhaps were one of the earlier JPAs between two cities in Marin. Whereas the Tiburon Peninsula Traffic Relief JPA, which is also a JPA between Belvedere and Tiburon, but like the Recreation JPA, the Traffic Relief JPA also has the school district as a third JPA member. The Traffic Relief JPA was created just about 5 years ago in 2016. Previously, the school district had run a small yellow bus, school bus service from East Corte Madera. The town and the city wanted to expand that dramatically, primarily to address the unacceptable morning and afternoon traffic congestion, primarily along Tiburon Boulevard. So that's a quick history of the background. Well, and the Traffic Relief JPA, it runs and manages the school bus services to 3 schools in the Reed Union School District and also to the Cove School in the Larkspur Corte Madera School District. It operates 7 buses with 14 morning and 14 afternoon school bus routes. So that's a quick overview.
Thank you very much, Bob. And somebody asked in the chat what a JPA was. My apologies for not defining that up front. That a JPA is a Joint Powers Authority. So that is just Jason, actually, I don't know if you want to give a quick definition of JPA.
JPA actually can stand for 3 different things. It's a Joint Powers Authority, a Joint Powers Agreement, and I forget what the third one is, but they're basically collaborations between multiple jurisdictions, multiple agencies where they work together on a specific subject matter. And in some ways, they yield some of their individual power to that joint group to oversee a mutual agreed upon activity. A lot of times these things occur, as you see here with you have multiple jurisdictions that are all trying to deal with the same problem, and it's easier for them to work as a team together because their problems overlap each other. And how to solve it isn't one jurisdiction can't solve it for just themselves. It's an area that has a whole problem. So you have an area that works together to do it.
Thank you, Jason. And later on in the second panel, Jason will have a little bit deeper dive into what a JPA is versus a consolidation versus a shared services agreement. Okay, well then let's move on to Town Manager Todd Cusimano. And Todd, if you want to tell us a little bit about what the Central Marin Public Safety JPAs provide, which I guess is somewhat self-evident. Just give us a little introduction.
Thank you, and good morning, and happy NFL draft day to everyone. This is a big day for some of us. So yeah, so our claim to fame, you know, when you think about sharing services and maybe all the way up to consolidation, I think in government, the two most difficult things for us to really wrap our head around and share services with are on the police side and land use, if you think about that. And so on the police side, our claim to fame was in 1980, the city of Larkspur and the town of Corte Madera were really looking at a way to ensure that they could maintain or improve police services at a cost-effective way over a period of time. And so in 1980, they actually consolidated their police services, formed the Twin Cities Police Authority, Joint Powers Authority. And they provided police services for both Corte Madera and Larkspur. Fast forward all the way to 2013, we again took that model and really try to improve it from lessons learned over a few decades. And we ended up forming the Central Marin Police Authority. It's also a joint powers authority with San Anselmo, Corte Madera, and Larkspur. It serves a population of approximately 35,000 people. When you think about one of the successes, you know, going back to their thoughts and really why they consolidated back in 1980, it was really to maintain those services, which I think we did, but it was also to control cost. And so when you think about that and we go into the presentation, I think one of the big claims to fame with the authority of why we considered it in 2013 was when you look at what San Anselmo, Corte Madera, and Larkspur pay respectively for full services, full police services, we each save approximately $1 million compared to our cohorts in the county and Bay Area. And so it's a good model, but it's also one that is very difficult, as you'll see. There's no roadmap of how you get there, but we're excited to tell our story about that as part of the Central Marin team.
Thank you very much, Todd. And now we will move on to Michael Frank, who is the Executive Officer of Marin General Services Authority. Can you tell us, Michael, just give us a little introduction to what MGSA is, what services you provide?
Absolutely, and I can provide a little bit of background as well. I did want to mention that with the JPA, and I think it's appropriate here, Marin has a long history, as you've heard already, but you'll hear more about a long history of collaborating, creating JPAs, going back a long time. And we're looked at as a model, and we have lots of different models. Any two government agencies can create a JPA, and a JPA for me is interesting because it's its own government agency. It has its own board, its own bylaws, and that new government agency has all of whatever authority it's given when it's created, but it can assume all of the regulatory and all of the powers that both the original or however many agencies got together to create it. It can take on all of the authority of the shared power of those other agencies. It cannot take on an authority that one of their member agencies does not have. So just some background on that. Next slide. So my agency, the Marin General Services Authority, was started in the mid-'80s. It was started by all the cities and towns getting together along with the county. And I guess at the time saying, this is ridiculous how much PG&E is charging us to maintain I don't know how many at the time, but the many thousands of streetlights throughout Marin County. They came together and formed a streetlight. They created a JPA, and then what they did was eminent domain. They took over approximately 16,000 streetlights from PG&E and brought those assets to the JPA to manage themselves. So that is a legal process that they went through at the time. So that was the mid-'80s. The only two towns, everyone was part of that effort in all the jurisdictions, but ultimately Ross and Marin City are the two areas that decided not to eminent domain. So Ross has all PG&E lights, and just about everywhere else in the county, the street lights belong to my agency. Over time, and we can talk about why down the road, but over time, all the jurisdictions found there were other areas, sometimes where the state was delegating regulatory authority or passing laws that individual cities had to do stuff. And it was just made a lot more sense to do it collectively than individually. So they started handing programs over to the Streetlight Authority. And in 2005, they decided to officially change the name because we were no longer at all just a Streetlight Authority. 2015, we took over the management of the Animal Services JPA. And then most recently, which I know we'll get into later, this past year, the Marin Telecommunications Agency, which is a separate JPA, was dissolved by all the cities and towns, and their responsibilities were taken over by my agency. Next slide. So this is our mission statement that my board came up with, and I want to read it only because I think it is very relevant to some of the thought processes that you'll go through when considering consolidation. So my agency provides the administration of a variety of programs and services. In our case, our board has no elected officials, which makes us different than virtually any other JPA in the county, I think. Not everyone, but most of them. My board is made up of the county administrator, city managers, and 2 public works directors. But we take on programs and provide really ministerial versus policy related issues. So our mission statement, where the policy issues are generally established in areas that are more cost effective to provide collectively or are significantly enhanced through partnering for the benefit of the greater Marin community. So you heard a little bit already from Todd about how much money, by creating the police authority, individual cities, those cities are saving. So clearly, one of the drivers for partnering is cost savings. I think there's another one for our case in particular. One of our programs is the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership. And that's, I think, an example where it's not saving money, but by having all the individual communities work together towards a goal, they actually can accomplish and have a greater impact than if each of the individual jurisdictions are off doing their own thing. Next slide. Just quickly, our basics, we have 10 programs. We are very interesting. We have absolutely no employees. I'm a contractor. We have 7 part-time contractors overall. We have no benefits, no retirement, no vehicles. And as of this year, we are totally virtual. We are going to be renting or subleasing one 9x11 office from TAM, which is a different JPA, so that we can store the hard copy records that we have to keep somewhere. Next slide. So these are our programs. I'm just going to quickly mention them. You can find out information on each one of these programs at our website. And these programs ended up with us for various reasons. So the first one, Abandoned Vehicle Abatement Program. This is $1 that everyone pays when you register your car. You pay it to remove abandoned vehicles throughout the state. That money comes to my agency. We were designated by all the jurisdictions, and then we allocate that money and work with all the communities to figure out how many cars were abandoned, and we distribute that money. As I mentioned, we manage the Animal Care and Control Services, which is a very large contract. It is a big price tag for all of our municipalities. I used to say in Novato that We spend actually more on animal control and animal services than we do on what we spent actually on youth and recreation programs in our community for youth. We recently took over, as I mentioned, responsibilities from the MTA, or Marin Telecommunications Agency. And as part of that, we manage the contract for cable television and also take in and distribute all the franchise fees related to all of the cable providers in the county. I mentioned our Marin Climate and Energy Partnership Program. Marin Map is a county-wide geographic information system system that has a public-facing side and a private-facing side. It is a map that all host of jurisdictions and government agencies use on a regular basis. It's interesting in that it's the members for that program expand past just jurisdictions. There are various community services district utilities that also are members of that particular program. Mixed Stop is a program where our role is for my board to review their budget, and we just work with the agencies to make sure that program is running smoothly. That is the Marin County Stormwater and Pollution Prevention Program. The staff actually work out of the county, and our role is really budget related. The mediation program is for neighbor-to-neighbor mediation, sometimes dog program mediation. That is a program run by the district attorney's office. We take in money from jurisdictions, we pay for that program and make sure that it's running smoothly. Streetlight maintenance was why we were started. We manage 16,000 streetlights throughout the county, manage their and contract out for their maintenance and replacement, sometimes the replacement. And most recently with 5G and really the need to put various pieces of equipment on our assets or the streetlights, we've created a new program where with Wi-Fi and all the stuff coming down the road, there was a desire by telecom companies to place equipment on streetlights. And then lastly, we regulate the taxi cabs throughout the county as well. Next slide, and that's my last slide.
Michael, while we're switching there, we had a question in the Q&A. Is LAFCo or Marin GSA involved in Digital Marin, perhaps to help form a JPA to coordinate universal internet access across Marin?
A great question. So the quick answer is Digital Marin is a collaborative project. So we are one of the partners involved with that process. They asked me, so as executive officer, I am facilitating and doing the community or government outreach related. I facilitate the working group that is doing the needs assessment with all of the government agencies. And part of my involvement right from the start was, who knows where this goes down the road in terms of a community-wide broadband and the governance structure for something like that. So it's a great question. And I wanted to be involved to make sure I knew whether it would be appropriate or totally not appropriate for any discussions about governance moving forward, which won't happen for a while, what that role might be for MGSA. We can go into that more later if folks want. So yes, I've been really involved, but that is a larger collaborative process moving forward countywide with a lot of partners. And then this last slide, I will just say, just lists our programs and gives you a sense of our structure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I know there's a lot there. Thank you for squeezing that into a short amount of time just to give us an overview. So my next question for the three of you was about how you got it started in the shared services process. Bob told us a little bit, and Michael, you did as well. Why don't I start with Todd, and you can kind of tell us how the cities involved in those two JPAs got started in the shared services process.
you. And I think countywide, when you really look at it, I think a lot of us, we are all sharing services, and there's so many great stories. I think for us, we've really followed our cohorts on the fire side. I think there's so many great examples of shared services and up to consolidation with Southern Marin Fire, Ross Valley Fire, and others. And so for us, the Larkspur Corte Madera side, and I'm going to talk about this, all levels of our government, we built a relationship over years, not just being neighbors, but also in just sharing services and consolidation. And so we were really comfortable in this conversation. San Anselmo on the other side had the same kind of background. They did a lot of shared services. They formed the Ross Valley Fire Authority. They were also comfortable with that concept. And so when we, at this period of time and, coming out of that really horrible recession we had in the late 2000s, we were all hurting. And so when you think about sharing services, for us, our example was, it started there. Like how are we going to maintain our services over the long term? We can't freeze positions. And so we looked around and really there's 4 decision points for us. It was our council and the community. And I think the council and community, their biggest fears, there's a whole bunch, but it's local control and it's a risk, and they need to know that it's going to work. And they want it transparent, and they want that conversation in the open before they take that big major step. That's scary, especially when you're talking about police services for them. On the manager side, we're the same way. Look, if we're going to bring people into our decision-making matrix, we need to know that they're the right puzzle piece. We have that relationship. We have that trust, that mutual respect. We share values, and also that we know it's going to work. We're going to take some chances, but the big part of those bullet points, it's leadership. Do we share the same values and leadership? On the staff side, you have the staff. It's your director, your chief. Where are we at that point? What is the mentality? Are they going to think outside the box? Are they going to be proactive? And you have our labor group. Police officers in general, if you say, hey, we're going to share services or we're going to consolidate, they're not all going to jump at the, first in line to do it. It's uncomfortable. It's change. It's a tough one. Both sides of the 3 communities felt comfortable. We've had those tough conversations already. We shared a lot of values. And so what we did, we basically, just looking around, we joined our partnership with San Anselmo. The chief at the time, Chief Maynard, was in the process of considering retirement over a couple-year period. And so we basically joined forces. What really brought us together was our taxpayers approved our new Twin Cities at the time of police facility, and we needed to move our dispatch somewhere during construction. And so we turned to our partners in San Anselmo and asked for their assistance, and they actually housed our dispatch center for 18 to 24 months at $1 a year lease. And so that's what started it. And that was big on San Anselmo's part. And that's what started our relationship. We had dispatchers under the same roof with our San Anselmo dispatchers and officers. They started to build a relationship. And then that's the key part. Once your elected officials, management, your chiefs are on the same page, now you let your employees just build that relationship, and that's what started it for us. And then as we move forward, it was very successful. We got together and said, let's start doing shared services, and let's just let the opportunities come to us. Let's share, one of our biggest issues in our communities is traffic. There's a lot of traffic issues. Well, let's share our motor officers, our traffic team, and let's have them go in all 3 jurisdictions and provide traffic services. It'll enhance our enforcement and our education. Then let's share our investigators. Maybe we don't need as many investigative detectives amongst the 3 of us. Maybe we can move them to traffic or back to patrol, but let's share investigations. And then as retirements came about, it was just opportunity. Do we want to fill that position? Can we share it? We had a captain position open up on one side. And so do we need to fill it, or can we share it? And so it went like that for about a couple of years. And before you knew it, both of our departments operationally, we merged services from administration all the way down to records. We were sharing at all levels within shared services agreement. It's something we could undo within 30 days if we didn't like it, but we were problem solving and just seeing where it took us. And over that couple-year period, it was really successful. And so then when we started to have that success, we moved it to really the uniforms, you know, where people are going to see it every day, our police officers. And so I talked about traffic, but then what we started doing is instead of paying for overtime costs, if we had a shortage in one of the communities, we would actually move our officers around and patrol amongst the 3 jurisdictions. And we had that story. We would tell the story day to day, you know, where they would see a Twin Cities patch, police officer patch in San Anselmo, or San Anselmo police officer patch in, you know, Corte Madera, Larkspur. We would tell the story with a flyer. Look, this is what we're doing. Here's our mission. We're sharing services. And we would tell it person by person as we went. Very successful. You know, there were a lot of up and downs, obviously, but I think overall it was a success. And then through retirements, we had a series of retirements at the top of the organizations. You know, when you need a police department and you have a population of 10,000 or more, you need a chief, you need a captain, you need 4 sergeants. So when you think about a merge and opportunities, what happened for us is we had a chief, a captain, and a couple of sergeants retiring within that 2 or 3 year period. And then it opened the opportunity to say, hey, let's not just share, can we actually consolidate? And, you know, through the leadership, we had a really good team, but again, there's just not one way of making it happen. It started with our council, you know, on each side, and really starting to form the governance of what that would look like. You know, we had Bob Ravazio and Sloan Bailey on the Corte Madera side. We had Catherine Way, Larry Chu, and Dan Hilmer on the Larkspur side, and Tom McInerney and Ford Green on the San Anselmo side. And it started with them, their comfort level, you know, saying, I think this is going to work. Let's try it. And really, you know, the management team, you know, you had you had Debbie Stutzman, Dan Schwartz, and Dave Bracken, the city managers for Corte Madera, Larkspur, and San Anselmo. One of the key pieces of this was, you know, it's the puzzle pieces, and it's something that we forget. It's not on paper. It's never, you know, we don't talk about it a lot, but it's something special when you share services. But when you start to talk about, and Debbie Stutzman, I'll talk about this at the end, she equates it to a marriage and how you start dating. And then once you're married, you know, you have to keep, you know, working on that relationship. And she does a really good job of telling that story, but it's the puzzle pieces of problem solving at all levels. And so I was the chief at the time, but I had a really great management team with my managers and the council members that I talked about. And we all came together, we shared similar values, but we looked at things differently. We problem solved things differently. We challenged each other. And we sat in the room for multiple days, multiple weeks, multiple months, just saying, what would this look like and what's the best way to go about this? And I got to tell you, in government, when you're making big picture, you know, you're solving big picture issues and you have that relationship, it's one of my greatest moments. It makes me a better leader now, being in that group with those individuals who are smarter than I, but just checking your ego at the door and doing the work for government and for the people we serve. We formed that JPA in that room with all of us, and bringing in the labor group and problem solving it. And one of them was Dan Schwartz. Dan Schwartz in Larkspur, he has a great fiscal background. How he problem solves is different than me. But together we make good decisions. He also came from the LAFCo side. You know, he wasn't helping consolidate or sharing services amongst municipalities. He was helping merge cities down south. And so he had a really good knowledge of the best practices, pitfalls, and things we should think about. And over that 8 to 10 month period, we were able to actually form the JPA. And so when I started with this, the stakeholders in this, it started with the community telling that story, you know, every day for 3 years, why we're doing it. And again, it's to maintain and improve police services over the long term at a cost-effective rate. And that's by eliminating redundancies, not necessarily officers. You know, in some cases you can add officers. It was to eliminate 2 chiefs, 4 captains, 8 sergeants. You're cutting it by 50% through attrition over time. And I think it was really successful. I'm proud of it. The local control part was what I think covered in our JPA model through the governance model. So it's 2 council members from each jurisdiction form the police council. You also, on major issues such as budget, fiscal, you need a majority vote on that approval, but you also need a yes vote from each jurisdiction. And that starts to speak to the local control. It forces you to problem solve and work together to really have good solutions. And so again, fiscal was a part of it, but when I go back, we think about what service are we trying to provide and what do we need to provide that services for the long haul. I think one of the major misconceptions when it comes on police services is I think everybody wants their own police department and they talk about unfunded liabilities and all the issues, but they don't talk about and understand really what they are actually asking for services, service delivery. And I think our model is a good one, but it's also an example of how difficult it is when we're still one of the only consolidated police authorities between municipalities in the state of California. And so I give the 3 jurisdictions a lot of credit. And I think that the strength of us, again, is our problem solving ability. I can think, back to 2012 of all the conversations with Ford Green, who I'd never have the opportunity to work with in San Anselmo on police, on police services and how we provide those services of the conversation we're having today. We're better because of that relationship with San Anselmo and the changes that we made back in 2012 that's being talked about today. So I'm proud of it. I think we're all doing services though. I think when we talk about this conversation, I think my most important point, and I'll stop, is the stakeholders. And it's the elected officials with the community. It's your city and town managers. It's your chiefs and directors, and it's the labor group. It's all of them together. And I think it has to start at the top. Are you willing as a leader, as a leadership team, to allow the chief and labor group to problem solve and basically see what's out there, build the relationships and present things from the bottom up of, can this work? And it can't start without that. And once that happens, some really special things can go on, but I think it takes leadership because you ultimately have to go through the door and it's going to take the management team and the council to push it. And it's a hard one, and I get it. And this isn't about consolidation, but I think it's sharing services and ultimately what that can be. Sharing services in the long haul is a little bit risky with some of the changes within CalPERS and how they look at employees, and they do that employee audit. When you get into human resources, when you have multiple jurisdictions and you have a director overseeing both municipalities, you can get in issues with the labor group. So there's some things that we need to think about long term. So there's a lot of hurdles, but I think there's a lot of examples that you're going to hear about today that speak to that. And so I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Todd. Michael, I saw that you had your hand up, and I know you have some opinions on how one gets started in shared services and what's required.
Well, I just have a lot of opinions, but
and a lot of experience to back them up.
No, I want to support everything Todd said. They did it right, and I think it's a perfect example of how to do it right. I thought it'd be helpful to talk about a disaster, which was when I was in the city of Fremont. Now we're going back, I don't know, 1 or 2 decades. A relatively large city compared to larger than, I think right now, larger than our county overall. And their fire department, they had a city manager, and the neighboring city, Union City, their own fire department, large departments. The city managers were both strong leaders, and they consolidated those 2 fire departments. It took years, but it was definitely led by those 2 city managers. It provided the vision, brought everyone along. And as Todd mentioned, bringing and problem solving with the labor unions to combine is not an easy task. The one city manager, so they consolidated. The one city manager left in the city of Union City, and this individual had their own strong personality, and literally they undid 2 years later, after officially going live and being one department. 2 years later, they undid the entire thing. So there's an example where it didn't work. And I think what Todd mentioned are all the reasons why it didn't work. And I think part of it is Todd talked about it being more organic and partnering over a long period of time, building the relationships and not having it being led by two leaders at the top, that it was supported more organically by everyone and could survive when one of the city managers, if one individual comes in, you have a new leader, what happens then? So I just want to echo the various areas that Todd mentioned that I think help with success, and some warnings about what can happen if you don't make sure you're covering all of those bases.
I just want to remind me, I have somebody with a hand up. If you could just put the question into the chat or the Q&A, we can have the panelists answer it, and we'll have at the end some more time for questions as well. Yeah, I think that you're Michael, you're noting the pros and cons there, and highlighting that it can't just be driven by sort of the charisma of, or sort of force of one person. It really has to be, as Todd mentioned, taking the time to very carefully bring everybody along as part of the process. Bob, if we can go back to you, I know the ranch is a long time group, and the traffic JPA is a little bit newer one. Tell us a little bit about how either of those maybe got started, and what were the how did you get from point A to point B there?
Well, it's interesting because we're at the other end of the spectrum in terms of size and complexity, is what Todd was talking about, bringing police forces together. And so in both the cases of the joint recreation and the traffic JPA, to a great extent, they're community volunteer-led efforts. Particularly the ranch. The ranch is a bit unique, which some other cities might be interested. I believe we are the only municipal recreation department, Marin, that's self-funding. Its operations have historically paid for themselves through the fees charged for the recreation programs. There was an exception to that in 2013, when it became more and more difficult for us to use the school facilities because of overcrowding at the schools, that ultimately the two cities stepped in financially to help with the construction of a recreational building for the JPA. But aside from that, the recreation JPA, really, the two cities have very little involvement with. I mean, they appoint the board members along with the board members from the school district. But the board pretty much runs that JPA. The traffic relief JPA is a little bit different because it takes funding. It's not, obviously not self-funding. Well, maybe it's not obvious. The bus passes we sell only cover about 50% of the operating costs. And we thought it was important that the cities subsidize those bus passes, because that was the reason we were able to reach the point where about 50% of the students in the Reed Union School District actually ride the buses, because we were able to keep the prices low. But a part of that is generous funding from the cities, as well as from Corte Madera, is from the county, the Measure AA funding. We have a lot of sources of funding to keep that going. In both of those JPAs, the involvement of the school district was important for obvious reasons, particularly with respect to the yellow bus traffic relief JPA, because the school district has control over bell times, start times, and a lot of issues that are important for that JPA.
And Bob, it sounds like the school district is participating in terms of the communications and, like you said, coordination of bell times, but are the schools participating in either one financially?
With respect to the traffic relief JPA, yes, the school district does put some funding in. It's very limited. They're on a very tight budget, but they do have some money in the race.
Thank you. And we're getting towards the end of this panel, and there's so much more here, and we do have a question, but I'm just gonna, before I go into that, I'm gonna ask Michael to talk a little bit about MTA, and then I'll ask Todd to talk a little bit about Central Marin Fire.
MTA, I would say that that it wasn't really a merger. We took on the responsibilities of that JPA. And what's interesting is that JPA had a board made up of a council member from every different jurisdiction. So you can imagine its dissolution took a long time and a lot of trust. I was talking about leadership before. The reason I think that was able to be dissolved, it almost never happens that you dissolve a government agency. This is one of those cases. But there was a lot of leadership on the part of Barbara Kohler, who was chair of the board at that time, and from USACHI as well. And there was leadership on my part in terms of, okay, these are the conditions under which I believe this would work, and we would take it on, and working with my board to make sure that that would happen. So, I mean, it's not that leadership isn't important. Leadership is really important.
Sorry, just to interrupt, just to be clear, my participation in that was as vice chair of the Marin Telecommunications Agency and not as LAFCo, just to be clear.
Yes, thank you for that. Ultimately, we'll save the jurisdictions in the county over $100,000 at least. And over time, the legislature had really removed some of the core responsibilities of that agency. So it became less and less important for it to play a policy role. And once it stopped playing a strong policy role, then it goes into more ministerial in nature and becomes appropriate for us to take on the program, because we can do things cheaper than just about anybody. Because we have no offices, we have no employees, and generally we're contracting out for the various work to be done, or we're doing it with part-time contractors. So I don't know if there's anything else you'd like for me to highlight, or that as you observed that process, anything that you'd like to add. I know you're our moderator, but I'll turn it back on you.
Yeah, sure. And that's how you and I first kind of became acquainted, was when the Marin Telecommunications Agency board was looking at, well, gosh, as we move forward here, we were intended to take in the funds from the cable franchises and from the public education and government fund that is charged on everybody's cable bill, and we're supposed to provide public television for that. And we'd gotten to where we were nearly all sharing and funding a nonprofit, CMCM, the Community Media Center of Marin, to run the television station. And Michael, when we first talked to you, you emphasize what you had said at the beginning of this presentation, which is, look, if you're going to bring it to me, it needs to be ministerial in nature. The policy issues need to be largely settled. You have an elected board. I have a board that consists of staff members of the cities and towns. So we had to get the agency to a point where there were no really significant policy issues to be discussed, and that it was only then that we could begin the transition over to you. And to hand that over. And as you mentioned, it was a significant amount of savings. And also, this is something that's where the people are cutting the cord. Those franchise fees are likely to go down in the future, and having a low overhead agency such as yours handling the funds makes better, efficient use of that money as that happens. Todd, I will turn over to you. You talked a lot about Central Marin Police Authority. Could you talk about the Central Marin Fire JPA?
Yes, absolutely, and I'll keep it short. There's a lot of similarities, and I'll tie some of my overview into Pamela's question about some national research, shared services, the consolidation, if that's helpful as well. So. Central Marin Fire is interesting. Again, we had the same leadership in place. I think Central Marin Fire, especially on the Larkspur side, on the labor group, was really supportive of consolidation. They had been working side by side for a long time. They were familiar with the police model. And this is an example what I think you'll hear on the second panel with Chief Norton with Central Marin Police Authority, is when this happens organically over a period of years, it makes the process a lot easier when you have a strong relationship amongst the two labor groups, right? Because if they don't support it, you're not getting off the ground. Fire, like I said at the opening, is so much farther ahead than all of us. They do this in our county. There's so many great examples. And so they were eager for the most part to really move forward. And so we were able to follow the Central Marin Police model and do the same thing between Corte Madera and Larkspur and form the Central Marin Fire Authority. A couple key components, and I'll talk about Pamela, like her question. Consolidation isn't the answer, and shared services, quite frankly, isn't always the answer to solving all your problems. We're all different sizes, we have different needs, there's different situations. On the public safety side, when you think about for municipality, we're responsible for governance as a municipality, our infrastructure and public safety, right? And so public safety, when your costs start to go from 50% to 60% and creep up even more, you can't function as a municipality. And so one of the things we focused on the fire side was, how do we maintain services? We had retirements at the time. Can we eliminate some of the redundancy, and can we actually add paramedic firefighters to get 3 paramedic firefighters on each rig in each of the houses, right? So that was a big one. Can we add firefighters and paramedics, save money, maintain the services, and then a lot of times improve them? And then also on the pension side, the California rule, we currently had a 3% at 50 retirement formula, and we wanted to reform that to 3% at 55 for current classic employees. And so by forming the Joint Powers Authority at 11:59, they were Corte Madera and Larkspur firefighters. At 12 o'clock, they were Central Marin Fire Authority employees. And so they basically terminated from the city and town, and they moved into the authority. That mechanism allowed us to reform the pension formula to 3 at 55, which over the long term saved us multi-millions of dollars. And it was a big reform. And so when you step back and go, why would you consolidate? From a municipality standpoint, that has all the check boxes. You maintain and improve services, you add paramedic firefighters, which we all want, you control your cost, and you are able to reform pensions. Had all the check boxes, it was a lot easier. We were able to do that over a shorter period of time. And that's an example of the relationship and letting it happen organically, of really encouraging your staff to be creative and work together. And at the end of the day, say, hey, do you share the same values? Do you have the same philosophy? And there's always going to be differences. That's the growing pain, but it was a lot easier for us from that standpoint.
Todd, if I can just jump in, you guys were the first to use that new law that had to do with fire service consolidations. Can you talk about that as part of your?
Yeah, so one of the things we didn't know about in 2013, and Dan Schwartz is on this call too. He's actually the expert on this one. But in 2013, when we consolidated our police authority, we were the last JPA that CalPERS actually accepted for new CalPERS contracts, because one of the issues that happened shortly after that was down south. There was a JPA that went bankrupt, and they severed their JPA. And what happened was there was a big issue of who's responsible for the unfunded liability retirement cost. And so there was an IRS kind of ruling, and CalPERS had they felt that was jeopardizing and a weak point of JPAs, and they didn't allow any new contracts for JPA members. And so something our team did, and we partnered with some cities in the East Bay, and we helped work with CalPERS and the assembly to pass an assembly bill to speak to that, and what happens for the best practice moving forward of a new JPA. What kind of language do you need if we were to sever, and discontinue that JPA, how do you separate out the unfunded liability cost? And so we've been able to get around that. We have that best practice. I'm really proud of that. It's one of my finest moments of sitting in the CalPERS board meeting and seeing Dan Schwartz and one of their assistant attorneys have a back and forth. It's recorded, and it's one of my finest moments of seeing one of my cohorts give it to CalPERS. it was a good moment, so I got to give him some more props for that. So I think that's an example of why you would consider it. On the other side, and I'll close with this, you didn't ask, but like we have a sanitary district and we're a smaller sanitary district. We don't have any employees in our sanitary district. We use contracts and our public works engineering and maintenance team. A consolidation for us, when you math it out on why you would consider it, on the examples I gave for police and fire, it doesn't make sense for us as a town. And so that would be one where we don't support that. But on sharing services and technology and contracts with our cohorts in Ross Valley and the Southern Marin, it makes a lot of sense because we get economies to scale and save money on our contracts and services. So that would be an example of maybe where consolidation doesn't make sense, but shared services does.
Maybe we can do a little lightning round of all three of you on what were some of the lessons learned or things that helped you along the way. You know, there have been mentions of leadership, retirement of you know, management department heads, legislation. I know that every single one of your organizations was a very, very long time in coming to fruition. Maybe we'll start with Bob and go to Todd and go to Michael on any lessons learned along the way. Oh, Bob, you're muted.
I don't have a lot to add there because both the recreation JPA and the traffic relief JPA were kind of created from nowhere. There were the services they provide did not exist before the JPA's reform, hence there were no employees to decide whether they're a part of the JP or not.
Okay. Todd, any other lessons learned, things that helped you along the way?
Unmute here. Okay. Real quick. So again, I think there's lessons learned from really the four groups, right? But I think the governance model is really key to speaking to concerns at the council level. But I want to end it with what Debbie Stutzman said, and it has to do with really the council and managers, right? The executive directors of these organizations, because I think it starts with us. And she broke it down like this. She said, you don't necessarily marry the girl next door. Sharing works with communities that have similar values. Take it slow. We lived together first in dispatch and got to know each other before even thinking about the next step, which is dating. Dating is serious business. Be honest, straightforward, and address issues as they come up. Meet the family. Don't surprise your community. Take the time to involve the community, listen to their comments, and address the issues that arise. Engagement. A diamond is on her finger. Now the real work begins. To put separate lives together, details are important, words matter. Work out ahead of time to avoid controversy. The wedding day. Signing on the dotted line. Commitment of the partners to one another and the overall good of the combined organization is first and foremost. Happily ever after. Marriage is a commitment and it takes work. Our JPA is a commitment from all the members that we will continue to work together to work out a partnership that's healthy and productive. And that's the key. It's constant. Today, even after all these years, we still have to work at it. But it's our strength and it takes in our weakness, right? But our strength is together when it comes to those authorities, problem solving. That is really in my involvement, it's been the best decision making. My best decisions in government have been related to those relationships I have within the authority. That's what I would say.
That is excellent. We have a question in the chat that said, "Can we have a copy of that story?" I was thinking the same thing. I'll get a copy from you, and we'll put it out in our after report here. Michael, any lessons learned from you, from either from MGSA or from your previous experience?
It's hard to follow what Debbie said, but
It is.
I would just echo the trust piece, that maintaining the relationship is really hard, but it has to be done on an ongoing basis. It's when you do a consolidation and have different communities coming together, either consolidation or shared services, you have to maintain that relationship on an ongoing basis, or you get into trouble. For whatever reason, trust can deteriorate over time. And unless you're confronting it, unless you're talking about things and continually working on that relationship, it can go south, as the example I mentioned earlier. The only other piece that I would, a lesson that I think I've learned, or that I would encourage as folks look at some of these consolidations, and that is avoid duplicating administrative infrastructure. If you're going to create a new JPA for some reason, contract with another agency to provide the finance. Contract with, as one example, right now, I am going to contract 10 hours a week with TAM to open our mail, scan it, and send it out to the appropriate folks in our agency. That makes more sense than us hiring an employee to do that, to have a clerical person doing it. Likewise, I know there's a lot that's been going on with brand new JPA, which hasn't been mentioned in the county, the wildfire JPA. That has a lot of money coming into it, and I've had discussions with its executive officer, not for a long time, and I don't know exactly what they're doing now, but part of what I encouraged was, to the extent, depending on whether you have to have employees, to the extent you can contract with existing agencies to provide services and not duplicate, not have to have your own HR department, your own payroll department, your own finance, have all those different functions, to the extent you can just tap in where they already exist. And yes, you need shared. It helps if you have a culture and shared values with whoever you're contracting with, but that I would encourage folks to really pursue that first before saying, we need to hire employees to do all the functions that are out there. Those are really the lessons. I think all the others that have been raised have been really are valuable and have been really helpful.
Thank you very much. And the question in the chat from Pamela about consolidation, shared services versus consolidation, I think Jason is going to address that a little bit more in panel 2. There was a question about unsuccessful shared services. Michael did share a story about that. And I want to thank the 3 of you for painting just a little bit of a picture. You can tell we really could have another couple hours on each one of these and kind of go a lot deeper. But we're just going to skim the surface a little bit and then go into the next panel. So I think what we'll do now is we'll take a little 5-minute break so our panelists and attendees can go take a little bio break, take a moment to stretch your legs. We'll come back in 5 minutes and then we'll do the second panel. And after that, if our panelists are able to stick around, if there are general Q&A questions that would go to any of the panelists, we can address those and we do kind of the wrap up at the end. So I think what we'll do now is take our 5-minute break.
I do like the punctuality of my panel here, all coming back in right at the 5-minute mark. Let's go ahead and, if Olivia, if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started with the second panel.
Okay, let's do it. Let me share screen and we'll get going.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, sure. Let me get to the correct slide as well. There we are.
Here we go. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we are now going to start the second panel. Hopefully folks have had a chance to stretch their legs, use facilities, get more coffee, whatever you need to do to keep your morning going. We're going to continue on. I do want to give a friendly reminder to folks. I know that there are some people who are using the raise hand function. We are not using that system for this workshop. We're asking everyone to put in their comments either into the Q&A box, the chat box, or if you don't have the ability or understand how to use those, you can always send an email to staff@marinlafco.org and we will respond to questions as we can. We did get a few good questions on the first one, and some of the questions on the first panel that were given to the first panel were really meant for my panel. So we'll get to those questions as we go through our process here. So in starting our panel, we have today on panel 2, I'll go through them. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to go through, more importantly, in some ways, what is the different types of shared services that you can have. They really do run the gambit. So Olivia, if you give the thank you. So here's kind of a slide deck, and I know that people are going to see these little arrow boxes at the top, one going into the next. It's not meant necessarily to say that one leads to the other, although it can. It's more, I did it more from a formal to, or a less formal to a more formal approach. The informal agreements are when you have two agencies. Think of like, you have the county and a city who are trying to do street maintenance, and they share roads where in some sections it's the county road, in some sections it's the city road. This is an agreement where they both come together and say, hey, we're going to do our resurfacing of the street at the same time, or we're going to do it consecutively with each other. So there's some consistency between jurisdictions, and you don't have a street that, like, as a lot of people will see, like when you go between counties, all of a sudden your road goes very good to very bad, or very bad to very good, because you've switched jurisdictions and one does a better job of maintaining its roads. Informal agreements are more where there's just more than people that work together again in this process. So that is like an informal agreement. There's a lot of different types of informal agreements that are out there. Normally they're not legal agreements between people. This is kind of the discussion. And in some ways, if you went back to Todd's description of how you do this marriage proposal, this is like maybe two agencies that are starting to date each other, or starting to talk to each other and saying, hey, I might be interested in going out with you, but you haven't quite gone out on a date yet. The next group is more formal. They're what's referred to as MOUs, or moratorium of understandings is the legal jargon that's used with that. Those are when two agencies or more get together and say, we're keeping our independence, but we're still working together on a subject matter. Maybe you have an expert in a field that we don't have an expert in, so we're going to come and hire your expert to also be our expert. But the person still is only with one agency in that example. Or there's, once again, you've got a lot of examples of how MOUs can be used, but these are, generally just when you're sharing a service of an individual or a type of work that's being done, and everyone's working together, but each agency really is keeping its independence of each other. There's a lot more freedom. It's not too difficult normally to, for lack of a better term, get out of an MOU. Normally there's like 30-day notice, and you're now done with the MOU type of agreement. Your next one is joint power agreements or joint power authorities. The JPA really, there's a whole bunch of different definitions of what the A can stand for. There are some slight nuances in what the difference of the A means, but when you generally hear a JPA, it's when multiple jurisdictions have come together, have decided that we're not giving up complete power or control of a situation to another agency, but we're sharing our power together with other agencies. There is still legal differences between folks, and so there's that legal difference between the jurisdictions. They're not taxing authorities. They can't go out and put taxes on there. So like in an example of a JPA is like Ross Valley Fire Department is a JPA. They go out, and if they need to raise money, each agency needs to continue to contribute. And the three agencies, which is San Anselmo, Fairfax, Ross, and Sleepy Hollow Fire Protection District, are all part of that JPA. So if something goes on there, those four jurisdictions have to agree to either put something on the ballot, have to agree to transition some more of their general fund money over to cover costs. They're still working together. Those are more formal than MOUs in that it takes more to break up. You can't like, it's kind of like start thinking about you're getting married and you have shared assets. You've got to have some sort of divorce process in this in order to separate yourselves out. It's a little more formal than the MOU, but not quite as formal as the last category. And I put consolidation or mergers. There's really a lot of different categories that go in here. This is when two agencies or more become one, and they formally put themselves together. It's extremely difficult. If you think it's hard to get out of a JPA, it's, I don't want to say impossible to get out of consolidation or merger. There are ways to do it, but it is a much harder part of the process to do than if you're in a JPA. So that's kind of like where you're going across the spectrum of things. Those are your four major areas that we're talking about with shared services. There's a lot of nuances, a lot of subcategories that you can put into each of these things. And so the first thing that you're always looking to do when you're starting to talk about shared services is, which of these categories are you really talking about? Because you have a big spectrum of things. You will see a lot of times the ones that tend to get the most headlines are your consolidation and mergers, because those are the biggies. Those are the hardest ones to do. But reality is most of your shared services really are in the MOU JPA model. Most of those tend to fall in there. And even JPA is even less likely. The more likely it is an MOU, but you do have MOU and JPA tend to be your two most practical versions of how shared services really get done between government agencies, because you need to have some sort of agreement in place for most types of shared services. And most government bodies aren't going to get into a shared service agreement without there being some legal understanding of what's going on, because that's how you keep away from having disputes occur and all of a sudden having two fights between two different agencies. Like, well, you said you're going to do X and you said you're going to do Y, and there's no legal agreement there. Normally legal counsels for whatever government agency you have are going to tell you, have a legal arrangement in place so everyone understands what their role is in this process. So that, from a high level perspective, are your shared services. And so with that, our panel is going to run slightly different than the first panel, because we're going to be talking more about what is the process and thoughts of how you get into it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask some very initial questions of our panelists, and then we're going to try and hop into more questions from the audience than from having pre-arranged questions. So we want to make sure we're answering your thoughts as to what does it really take to start this shared service process going, and what does it take to do that. So with that, the first panelist I'm going to ask is Catherine Hilliard, who is a board member for Southern Marin Fire Protection District. And Catherine, you've helped set up two different shared service systems as a board member. You've been part of the consolidation of Sausalito Fire Department into Southern Marin Fire, as well as more recently a shared administrative services agreement with Mill Valley Fire, where you're now sharing your fire chief and some of your administrative support staff between the two agencies. You still have two different fire departments, but you're sharing the same system. So can you tell us a little bit about what led you as a board member to look at those two different types of approaches to shared services, and how you and your board approached each of these processes?
Sure, thank you. So it was an evolution. They're two different things. My experience is I came onto the board about almost 11 years ago, and we were in the process. And I want to just preface this by saying I'm now giving you the perspective of an elected official as opposed to a city manager or something. So it was already we were already in the dating stage with the city of Sausalito. But what happened in Sausalito is we were contiguous borders, and they were coming to us. Very often we would go to Sausalito and provide the services because they didn't have a really firm structure of a fire chief. They had turnover in the fire department. They had budget struggles that made them consider even laying off the small staff that they had. The firefighters themselves were really concerned about that, because what it meant to be provide services to the city of the residents of Sausalito, but also to the safety of the firefighters. And so we were negotiating this back and forth, and then they lost their chief. And so our chief at the time, Jim Irving, became their chief. And we put this agreement together. It evolved when a new city manager was hired, and when the labor union representatives went together with the city manager, the new city manager. They thought this would be an ideal way to do it, to just merge in. But that, as our wonderful panelists this morning have already said, takes a while. It took 8 years for us to get through the process of vetting this whole thing with elected officials and with the public, especially the issue from an elected official's perspective of losing control, of losing power to make the policy decisions, of losing power over the budget. But this is, again, I want to give LAFCo a plug. Toward the end, and we could have done this sooner, LAFCo did get involved and helped us to work out, what the benefits were to both agencies. At the end, there was a major shift, and 3 of the council members wanted to annex into the district, 2 did not. And as a result, and with the help of LAFCO, there wasn't an actual election, and we had to win the vote of the public in order to merge the 2. So that was the experience with Sausalito. The concern about getting onto the power issue, the policy issue. We, as a board, I was on the board at the time, and I felt really honored to be able to sign the document that brought them into the district. But we promised that if there were open seats, in fact, we expanded the board from 5 members to 7. And it was our will and desire to have those seats filled by representatives of the city of Sausalito. And that's exactly what happened. When we merged, in fact, instead of 2, we had 3 people come onto the board at that time. So that issue was addressed very well. So I had prepared some slides, and what I'm thinking I'm doing right here is recapping exactly what was said this morning. Oh yes, you were asking about Mill Valley. I think Mill Valley is an incredibly valuable experience for both agencies right now. I think we are in the engagement stage, but I'm hopeful. So I'm showing my prejudice. I'm hopeful that we can consolidate at some point, but I don't want to get into that now because there's some still unanswered questions, but I'm seeing nothing but positive right now about why we should. So if you don't mind, Jason, can I just run through these slides?
Oh yeah, wow. That question was meant, your slides I thought helped present the question I gave to you. So feel free to go through your slides.
Good. So I thought my job from you was the how-to part. Now that you're all convinced that you should maybe look at it at least, this was what our experience was, and with the very capable help of our Chief Christian Tubbs and Deputy Chief Ted Peterson, I was able to put some bullet points. I think less is more when it comes to slides. So, okay, how to implement an agreement. Well, first of all, as was said earlier, you got to have contiguous borders, and you have to have a mutual need for better service. So you look for the opportunities, and then you start the conversations early, because it may not result in the implementation of an agreement. And by the way, I just wanted to throw in that for years I was the Director of Government and Public Affairs for ABAG, and that's the largest JPA I think we have in the region. That is Section 6500 of the Government Code provides for joint powers agreements and has all the restrictions and what you can do. So, but I just wanted to continue with, you have to create a plan on a local level. Local is what everybody knows best, is local. So, and you have to do this through collaboration. It can't be that one agency does their things one way and the other does theirs that way, and then it has to be one or the other. It has to be a mutual joint effort. In our case, with Mill Valley, we are sharing battalion chiefs. We're sharing a chief and a deputy chief and prevention services. And I think at least at this point, I'm seeing numbers that show that each agency is saving about $650,000 a year now as it goes. So it could be much better. So you create a plan through a collaborative process. And then of course, as was mentioned before, this is kind of a wrap up. It's the leadership of the elected officials, the management, staff, labor, and the community leaders, and LAFCo entering in early stages. My constituents are the public. I'm elected to this office, and so I have to think about really local. Who do I represent? Even down to the neighborhood. What do they want? What are the priorities? Because the local level sets the priorities for all of us. So could I go to the next slide? So here's to clearly spell it out. It's what is being shared? What's your goal? What do you want to share? So that's the vision. And then when does the sharing of services begin and end? You might not know about the end part, but you definitely have a goal in mind. And when can you have to show each of the governing boards, the managers, the chiefs, the city managers, all of these have to have some matrices to show whether they can benefit from this joint effort or not. And what are the benefits and risks to each party? And then why? Make it clear to elected officials, administrators, and labor what you hope to accomplish that will benefit all that. And as was said before, as Todd mentioned, without labor involved at the beginning, without the support of your workers, the labor force, you won't go anywhere. It's got to be all levels. Okay, next slide, please. I'm sorry, there's a stuck. Am I frozen? Okay, good. I'm never sure about this. Okay, so then the how has to be clear. How will the shared services continue and possibly lead to a merger or annexation? Do you want to continue with a JPA or a MOU or whatever? Or is it in the best interest of all that you become one larger district and provide these specialized services? And of course, I'm talking from the perspective of being on the board of Southern Marin, and I think we're, that would be the best way to go for me. But anyway, all right, and then you spell out exactly what services will be provided and by whom, and how will we pay for this? In the case of Sausalito, there was a property tax transfer that was part of what they had used in order to have their own self-standing fire district, but now a portion of that comes to the district in order to pay for these services. That was the way they did it. And there are some other contracts. We use their building, so we pay them an amount of money for this using their public facility over there in Sausalito. So it's more than one method of payment. And then how will these what measurements can we use to show that, just as was mentioned before, you're in a marriage, but you got to work at it all the time. And it's the public and the situation with local finances is, first of all, the public has to be invested in this. Second of all, as you all know, your financial stability and changes from year to year. We're going through that right now. So you have to have measurements and you have to have trust and you have to go at these things together. So to me personally, this next one, how we gain trust, is through the approach that we are using now with the city of Mill Valley. We're working together. And whenever we come to a bump in the road, we have to actually iron that out and go to the next step. And it does take a commitment and it takes cooperation. And just as was said before, in a marriage, you have to give a little and take a little, but that's it. And trust is the most important thing. And then how will we gain taxpayer support? In our case, the reason I put that in there is because the annexation in Sausalito required a vote of the public. So it's really important that they be brought along on all steps, have really good, a robust public education program as you go through the process, and show yourselves and the public the benefits of what you're doing. So with that, I just wanted to say, so Southern Marin Fire Protection District was actually formed out of two other districts it's a special district authorized by the County of Marin. And we have about 27,000 population and 14,000 households. And I feel that from my perspective, I'm accountable to them. And so I think that I'm looking forward to working with Sashi more on shared services with the city of Marin. But I think that these are all elements and ingredients that you really have to have if you're looking at it. And so was my perspective, and my assignment was to share our experience. And it's been, for me, positive, but it's like up and down. It's like a sine curve, but mostly forward. That's the thing.
Okay.
So I appreciate it. That's it for me.
Thank you. We did have a question come in while you were doing that on how do you handle a merger of agencies which have large differences in reserves or unfunded liabilities. So did you run across that with either the Sausalito or any of the other stuff that you've worked with, Catherine?
Yes. What you do, well, as far as unfunded liabilities, this is where during the process of going through LAFCo and also at the end when you're formulating the contract, those have to be spelled out very specifically. And this is where you agree who takes care of what. So in the case of unfunded liability and in pension, it was worked out that the city of Sausalito would pay for the pension of those that were already in their system. And then, just as was said before, people resigned from the fire department and came as new employees into Southern Marin. And so a new set of pensions was established for them. And they merged into our system. But that all has to be clearly spelled out as part of the merger agreement. So we came to a just way of handling that. It was presented to our board, our finance committee, the city council had to be okay about all of this. So that's how it was handled.
All right, thank you very much. And I will add to that as well. Part of the LAFCo process is to make sure that whoever is that when mergers or consolidations occur, that everyone is made whole, that like one side isn't paying for the other side's problems that may have existed prior to the official marriage occurring. So that's one of the things that LAFCo does look at as part of its approval process. So going on then, we're going to move on to our next panelist here, Betsy, who is with the County of Marin. For a long time, the county, acting as the board for Murray Park Sewer Maintenance District, was running a very small district that was completely surrounded by a much larger district that did similar work. While this worked for a while, can you talk about why the change was made and the process you went through to consolidate Murray Park into Ross Valley Sanitary District?
Sure. Well, I joined the county back in 2016, and at that time started working with one of the assistant directors to help manage the Murray Park Sewer Maintenance District. As you said, it's a very small dependent special district. It serves 91 living units in Murray Park. And it was established a long time ago by the county, basically providing the sewer system in a small unincorporated neighborhood in Marin that didn't necessarily at the time, back in 1949, fit into one of the larger sanitary districts. So when I came on board, I started looking through the files and I noted that there was definitely the desire going back many, many years, in fact, probably 10 to 15 years before I joined, to potentially annex the system, the Murray Park Sewer Maintenance District, into a larger sanitary district, because, you know, the county recognized that we're not necessarily the experts in running small sewer districts. We just don't have the economies of scale in order to be able to really do proactive maintenance and capital improvement projects. And our biggest concern is just making sure that the community within Murray Park is getting the best level of service. And to that end, the county had been contracting with Ross Valley Sanitary District to basically operate and maintain the system for us. But we would be in charge of doing capital improvements. So there was definitely a desire, and even going back to 2008, there was some serious effort on the county's part to move forward with an annexation. And the first hurdle for that was taking a look at the sewer rates, because the rates that the county was charging Murray Park residents as an annual fee was very different from what the surrounding sewer district, sanitary district, was charging their residents. And so the county actually moved forward with a Prop 218 process to try to bring up the sewer rates in Murray Park such that they were more in line with what Ross Valley Sanitary District was charging for their area. And I'll just say briefly, though I'm not an expert in this, the sewer rates that the county was charging its residents in Murray Park was only a portion of the cost that the county was actually taking in for the sewer service, because a portion of the ad valorem property tax from the residents was actually going towards sewer services as well. So on the surface, the residents thought they were paying much less than the surrounding areas, but in reality, their property taxes were covering for that, and it was almost an equal share of what the county was charging or ultimately collecting through property taxes for sewer services as what Ross Valley was. But I'm not sure, because I didn't work for the county back in 2008, but for some reason, the annexation process dropped off. And when I came on board in 2016, I was working with an assistant director here at the time, Eric Steger, and we were contacted by LAFCo as part of their municipal services review. They were putting together a report, the 2017 Southern Marin wastewater study. And that process of working with Jason's predecessor on that report really kickstarted DPW staff's motivation to get re-engaged in the annexation process, because again, we felt that annexing the district would provide a high level of service to the residents of Murray Park, and also it would provide cost efficiencies in terms of the maintenance, because when you have a district like Ross Valley, where they're serving 47,000 customers versus the county who's only serving 91 customers, the larger district's ability to fold in capital improvement projects over the course of 47,000 plus 91 customers is much more efficient than the county. So together with LAFCo, with their working group process, they really helped facilitate the relationships that some of the other panelists have been talking about, the relationships that we eventually formed with Ross Valley Sanitary District, and working with Steve Moore and Felicia Newhouse and other Ross Valley Sanitary District staff together with LAFCo was a great process, and it was a rewarding process, because in working with them, we identified what we felt were the hurdles to annexation. And, with LAFCo's help and with Ross Valley's help, we were able to come up with solutions for those hurdles. And in the end, the annexation process was actually incredibly smooth. And then through the LAFCo working group process, all of the stakeholders were engaged, including the community stakeholders. And again, working with LAFCo early on in the process really allowed us to engage the stakeholders in the community early and identify any concerns with the annexation process, and be able to address them in order to move forward with full support. And I'll just say one other thing. I mentioned the Prop 218 process that the county went through back in 2008 in order to try to raise the annual sewer fees so that they were more in line with the other fees being charged throughout the region. We assumed that we were going to have to do the same process in order to do an annexation with Ross Valley this time around, even back in 2017 when we started the conversations. But honestly, and maybe Jason remembers better than me, I'm not sure if this was at LAFCo's prompting or Ross Valley, but in the end, we were able to come up with an agreement to transfer the reserve funds that came from that portion of the ad valorem property tax. We were able to transfer the reserve funds from the county to Ross Valley in the annexation agreement with the stipulation that those funds only be used for the Murray Park parcels for the residents. And because of that, the Ross Valley Sanitary District was able to accept the Murray Park residents into their system without raising their annual sewer tax rates. And they did this because Ross Valley has a 5-year rate increase process that they go through the Prop 218 process about every 5 years. And they had just finished their 5-year rate increase when we initiated the annexation process. So it didn't make sense to try to change Murray Park's rates prior to having them enter into Ross Valley. And so instead they agreed to accept the reserve funds, use them only for the Murray Park residents. And then they would include the Murray Park parcels in their next 5-year rate increase plan. So that was a hurdle that we thought was going to be very difficult to overcome in the annexation process. And in the end, with working with LAFCo and working with Ross Valley, they made it very easy and simple. And it was really a pleasure to be a part of that whole process.
Thank you. And you kind of tossed the question to me, and there's a question in our Q&A section about how did Murray Park residents respond to the change of sewer services. I want to respond part to that and also part to your question,
sure,
Betsy, about the funds and the money that was there. It was our LAFCO suggestion, my suggestion when we first started, and everyone immediately agreed, yes, whatever money is there should be maintained and kept for the Murray Park residents. And that's where part of our process was I actually reached out to the local supervisor for that area and said, hey, we're having this discussion. Who are the key leaders, community leaders I should be talking to in this very small area? I mean, clearly it was a 90 plus parcel area. So you're not going to have, a large group of people, but there was a small group of people. I went and sat down with that group. The supervisor happened to join me during that meeting. And that's how we kicked off the community side support. We then later had a more public open meeting where everyone who was in the district got mailed a thing about a workshop we were doing. And anyone who wanted to could attend that. Between both those meetings, we ended up talking with 10% of the parcel owners just because of the way it's such a small group, we could do that. So it was very well received from everyone. They understood what was going on. And during that process, if I remember correctly, we actually asked them and made the comment like, there's this money, how would you want to see it spent when Ross Valley takes it over? Because they're not going to need to keep the money in the same way that the county did. And that's where we came up with some of the solutions of how to do it. We incorporated that community discussion into our final conclusions by having them there from the early stages of all of our discussions.
Yeah, and I will say that from a customer service standpoint, Ross Valley Sanitary District has been maintaining the Murray Park Sewer District on behalf of the county for many years. And so the residents of Murray Park were happy with Ross Valley. And frankly, many of them didn't realize that they weren't actually within Ross Valley, within their sanitary district. So from a customer service standpoint, I think everyone that we spoke with was, very happy with the level of service they were already receiving. And so that went a long way in their support towards, being annexed into Ross Valley, into their district.
Correct. So we're going to go now to our final panelist, Chief Norton. Prior to being Chief Norton, you were actually the president of the police officers union for in the Central Marin area for your group. And that was during the time when, as we heard earlier from Todd about the merger of Central Marin, when it was first Twin Cities and then became Central Marin. Can you talk a little bit about how you viewed the original merger of San Anselmo into the Twin Cities Police Department that eventually would become Central Marin Police, along with any issues you saw occur, and let us know as chief now, if somebody were to approach and say, we want to now take Central Marin and make it even bigger, add another one, what would you potentially do differently this time than what was done when San Anselmo got brought into the system?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so just a little background on me. I was hired in 2001 by Twin Cities Police. So my whole career, I have been a police officer with a JPA. And then right around 2011 is when we started first sharing services with San Anselmo. At that time, I was a sergeant, which is a frontline supervisor, and I was the POA president. So that's our organization's president. In addition, I was our support services sergeant, which handles investigations, training, backgrounds, things like that, when we first started sharing services. So I am the chief now, but I thought it'd be really valuable to talk to you, kind of pretend like I'm 10 years younger and I'm a sergeant right now. You know, I wish I was 10 years younger, and how I thought of things back then. Because I think that we've kind of heard from elected officials and managers. And so I'm going to play the role of labor, because I did play that role 10 years ago. And interestingly enough, Manager Cusimano, who is one of my bosses who spoke earlier, he was the chief at the time, if you didn't realize that, when we first did this merger. And we actually presented along with Manager Stutzman to the League of California Cities, either in 2013 or 2014. And I found some old notes. So I'm glad I saw these so I can get back in that mindset of a sergeant and not a chief. So when we first went through this, like I said, I was the POA president of Twin Cities. Now, one thing to remember is there was another POA president of San Anselmo. So right off the bat, you have these two cultures, you have these two organizations, and it's not just there's two chiefs, there's two labor groups, there's two labor leaders. And I'd never even met the POA president from San Anselmo until we started talking about like a merger. And we, you know, even though we both grew up in San Anselmo and our jurisdictions were a couple miles apart, very different cultures of police departments, very different cultures of personnel, different cultures of how the POA and labor worked. And you see that around Marin, right? Every town and city is very different. Even when they're right next to each other, there's distinct differences and expectations. And that doesn't change with any of your departments you have, whether it's recreation, public works, police, fire. So we had these different cultures. And that was one of the big issues we saw, was just how do we bring us together? Because we could tell at this point that where the wind was headed and that we were headed toward a merger eventually. And we wanted it to be as smooth as possible for all the employees. And we had good relationships, both of us, with our chiefs. So we weren't the type of organization to put up roadblocks or make a big stink. We wanted this to be successful all the way around. And I think that really is key. I think if you have an aggressive labor group, it's really going to be an uphill battle to do a merger or something like that. It's really important to reach out and really have a good relationship before you even try and do this. I think even sharing of services would be difficult with that confrontation going on between your groups. So that was kind of the most important key thing. Some of the nuts and bolts we ran into really early on, just speaking solely from labor, is seniority and people's rank are a big deal in police departments. And how do you merge? And usually seniority and rank is how you decide what vacations you get, what shifts you get to sign up for, whether you're working weekends, whether you're working nights, or you can work day shift. And we had these two cultures coming together. So that was a challenge to merge those. MOU and benefits is huge, right? Two separate MOUs, two separate sets of benefits. What pay rates were, what retirement benefits were, what were the schedules at the time we merged. San Anselmo split their weeks because police work 24/7. one side of the week worked Sundays and one side of the week worked Saturdays. Twin Cities was different. The junior shift worked Saturdays and Sundays. So that's a huge family difference when you're merging these two together. And then when you throw rank and seniority into that, people who are used to getting total weekends off might be now working nights, might be working, there's a lot of concern among our associations at the time. Another thing is, as we were doing this over a couple year period, people retired, people got hurt and medicaled out. There was promotions going on, and we knew we were heading towards a merger. But when one agency promoted somebody, that was now a spot that people from the other agency who maybe felt they were more qualified for weren't going to get an opportunity to test for. And one of the biggest, and how do you merge our two boards? You have two presidents. One has to basically step down. No one was retiring. And how many board members are we going to have going forward? And really the big thing was just keeping morale up, trying to talk to people and let them know that this was going to be a good thing. It was the fear of the unknown. This was going to be a good thing at the end of the day. I will say that police officers, and I think most government workers I could apply this to, especially police and fire, who I know best, is when we pick a department to work at, most of us pick it thinking, I want to work there for 30 years. And we're really picky and finicky about where we go work. We pick a place for a community, for the town, for that department. How big is it? What type of calls for service do they handle? Things like that. And so when you talk about merging, you're now creating a whole new entity. So our entity became bigger. And for San Anselmo, it became busier because we're near the freeway over here in Corte Madera and Larkspur, and we have two big shopping centers. We have a freeway. The Richmond Bridge is next to us. For my officers, some of them, it got a little quieter. Working in San Anselmo is much more, getting out of the car and walking around and a little more community oriented because there's less calls for service involving crimes and things like that. So it's not necessarily what the officers signed up for initially. So it was really, it was a big part of us talking to them and keeping the morale up, as well as our chief at the time, Manager Cusimano now. I don't want to talk too much, but just some quick lessons learned to hit on the second half of what you said. If we were to merge now, just looking back at some lessons learned from both the administrative or chief, but also from the POA, what are some things we could do better? In hindsight's 2020, I wouldn't fault us. I think Chief Cusimano at the time and myself and the managers, I think we really busted our butt for a couple of years making this thing happen. It was not easy. It was definitely the most difficult year or two of my life with the extra workload. Because when you start sharing services, you forget, what does that mean exactly? We go, oh, there's a saving there. We can freeze a position. But the amount of work stays the same. So in my role, just to give you some perspective from my, as the 2012 Sergeant Norton, now all of a sudden being in charge of training, I was in charge of 50% more training than I was the day before. I was in charge of 50% more investigative cases than I was the day before. And you see how the work kind of ratchets up. So there was light at the end of the tunnel, but those initial sharing of services, you got to always remember, what is it doing to your line level there in terms of workload? Because I was definitely not twiddling my fingers before then. In terms of lessons learned from both kind of the POA and the chief, I think they really overlap and interact a lot. And I think one of the big things is just keeping people in the loop, talking to your employees. If you think you're keeping them in the loop enough and talking to them, probably triple that. And you might be getting close to how much they actually want. Because they're going to be very concerned. They're thinking about the future. They're thinking about, do I want to be part of this moving forward? Do I want to go somewhere else? Am I going to like this? Am I not? I don't know. It's a lot of concern for labor, right? Keep them in the loop, reassure them, and fill them in. Don't keep them in the dark, good, bad, or otherwise. I think that's really important, and that builds a lot of trust. Do a lot of team building. Even though we were close to San Anselmo, we didn't know each other because we didn't back each other on calls. We knew the Ross officers better than San Anselmo just because jurisdictionally they butt up to us. So we ebb and flow a little bit. In hindsight, as the POA and even as the department, we should have probably had some barbecues or just something like that and done it quarterly. And honestly, as the POA, encourage some off hours hanging out, some bonding, going out to restaurants with big groups. And that's really where you get close, because in the line of work I'm in, and this applies to fire as well, we trust each other with our lives. And that really gets time to build up with that. And it's really important to people. Some things we underestimated just really quick were, in addition to that, was the need to really train people up from both agencies to work in the different towns, different municipal codes, completely different streets, how to get around, what's the crime areas, what's not the crime areas. Everything we do that we take for granted, having worked here for 20 years, brand new there. And we just kind of had this opinion, well, yeah, we're all police, we're experienced, we'll figure it out. We could have done a better job training people up. How's our equipment, or all that IT, all that technical stuff? We underestimated the challenges of getting that to work together. And we should have started a lot sooner on that. And then for me, just as the POA president, I took a lot of the burden on myself and I handed a little bit out to my board, but I should have probably been having monthly meetings with everyone who was interested and sharing all that and getting their input. And then, because I was talking with the chief all the time, but I was shielding people, and I shouldn't have been shielding them from some of the, the negative things that were popping up or the bad things. Everyone should have been involved, because it did kind of create a lack of trust, and you just have to be super open. And those would be definitely some lesson learned, big picture going forward. And then I would just end with just reiterate how important it is. There's the four legs of the chair, whatever you want to call it, of your elected officials, your managers, your department heads, managers / department heads, and then your labor. But it's just so important. You get a weakness there, or you're not paying attention to one, and everything kind of falls apart. And I think that's a huge lesson learned. And in terms of community, I'll touch on that real fast. I think we did as much community outreach as we could at the time. Things are different now, as social media is so much bigger and better with Nextdoor and things like that. I would really hit that hard and take advantage of that, and do monthly updates on if you're sharing services with those groups, or nixles, or however you want to handle it. Because you do these community meetings, or you do council meetings, and I mean, realistically, over a year, you're only touching maybe a couple hundred people. Our jurisdiction is 35,000 people, and we have 40,000 calls for service a year. So one way or another, we're interacting with all our community members every given year, at least once, whether it's a traffic stop or a say hello or something like that. But we didn't reach enough people. So once we merged, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, we're still going through this process and explaining. I run into people all the time in San Anselmo who don't even realize we're Central Marin Police, and we merged in 2013. So it's a real ongoing thing. So I'll stop at this point. I could talk for hours on this. Sorry.
I'm sure you could. Thank you very much. I appreciate the worker side of thing. As a former San Francisco Labor Council delegate and a government employee myself who was in a union at one point, I greatly appreciate the understanding of you're merging cultures together, and I've seen that occur before. So that was one of the reasons why I was happy that you agreed to come on board, was to talk about let's not forget that there's this other side of it too. It's not all, nothing ever works perfectly. And so let's have a discussion about what doesn't. So next time we do it, we can figure it out. We have gotten a couple of good questions coming in while we were talking there. The first one I'm going to kind of take, it talks about tax sharing agreements and how they work amongst the different types of things. If you're going through a LAFCo process, you are definitely going to have a discussion about how are you paying for these services. It could be that each side says, well, each year we're going to give X amount of our general fund money to this new organization, whether it's a JPA or an MOU process or a consolidation merger. You're giving some money up in order to do it. You can't create new government or have new programs created without there being some cost to it. What the goal and hope is that you're already spending that money for yourself, and by doing it shared, you're saving money. So if let's just say I'm putting in $10,000, I'm spending $10,000 for something, and someone else is spending $10,000. If we merge it together, in theory, we have $20,000. But hopefully, if we're doing it together, it's only going to cost us 18 each. So we say, okay, I can pay 9,000, and the other person's going to pay 9,000, and that's how you get to your 18,000. If it's an equal split, it's a simple way, and that's how it works. If it's not an equal split, if I'm taking 75% of the time and the other person's taking 25% of the time, then I should be paying 75% of those costs. And the other one should be paying 25% of the cost. So it really depends on the situation and scenario. But you do need to have, the question came as a tax sharing agreement. I put it more as a cost sharing agreement. Taxes may be part of it, but it really is how are you paying for the services and what percentages are each person doing? The next question we got in was specifically for you, Catherine, although I might let Sashi jump in on this because I think it's going to pertain to both of you. It comes from a Mill Valley resident who realized that the participation in the Southern Marin Fire District is a shared service. They have a concern that they, as a constituency, have no representation on the board at the board level. I'm assuming they're referring to Southern Marin Fire. Do we have to consolidate annex to get board representation? I appreciate your thoughts. So Catherine,
Yes.
you want to go first?
Yes. The short answer is yes. It's not because of anybody's desire to not have anyone. It's the way that the law is structured. It's what do district laws provide? What does the city code and ordinances provide? And so we can work toward that. But right now, as it stands, actually the board represents the district and the city council represents the council. And so by this, our chief gives reports directly to the city council but reports to us as a board, because it would be really difficult for a chief to have two sets of policymakers. One, if there were ever a conflict, it would be really very difficult to address, to report to two boards, basically. But maybe Sashi has a different answer. I don't know. I'm just going by what the law provides now.
Catherine, I think you did an outstanding job in answering the question. I'm going to put my City of Mill Valley hat on now and not my LAFCo hat, just to distinguish that. So as Catherine mentioned, the current arrangement with Southern Marin Fire and City of Mill Valley is chief and administration sharing. And so we are effectively contracting out our fire chief role to their fire chief. So when he is doing work for the City of Mill Valley, he is accountable to the city council in that regard, the way that any department head would be. But he is hired and employed by the Southern Marin Fire District Board. If the City of Mill Valley does decide to complete the consolidation, and if everybody agrees, and this is something that Catherine and I and some others have been working on for a number of years, and hopefully we'll be getting into the meat of that very soon. Assuming that goes through, then it would be a consolidation. So as Jason mentioned, that's sort of the, that one end of the spectrum there on shared services. And it would mean that the City of Mill Valley would no longer provide fire services. So when LAFCo does the municipal service review of the City of Mill Valley, it would indicate that the City of Mill Valley no longer provides fire services. Fire services are provided for the residents of the City of Mill Valley by Southern Marin Fire. So that would mean that just the way that residents of the City of Mill Valley have water services provided by Marin Municipal Water District, their fire services would be provided by Southern Marin Fire. So the governance on the Southern Marin Fire Board, may shift during this process, or it may not, but the representatives of the City of Mill Valley would then shift, for fire services, would then shift to the Southern Marin Fire Board. Okay. Catherine, did I miss anything there? Is that?
No, that's yes. Thank you so much for that explanation.
Thank you.
No, and I think that is right. And I'm going to give a slightly different example. It's not Mill Valley, but you have the Tiburon Fire Protection District actually does all the fire services for the city of Belvedere. But Belvedere is not technically part of the district, and rather the city council contracts with the fire district to do its fire services for it. So the people who live in Belvedere currently don't have a representative on the fire district's board because they're not in their boundaries. We did an MSR not too long ago that Jaron did for us, where we talked about this issue, and we formed a working group to have a discussion about, does it make sense for Belvedere to officially be annexed into the Tiburon Fire Protection District as a way to maybe give the people of Belvedere a chance to actually have a direct say on the fire district board, be able to run for it, and have a direct vote for those people who actually do the fire services for them? Or do we continue to maintain the current system, which is the Belvedere City Council negotiates with the fire district, and if the residents of Belvedere have an issue, they really go through their city council in order to get to the fire district board? Not to say that the fire district board wouldn't listen to the residents of Belvedere, they're a pretty open and friendly group of people. But from a legal standpoint, that's how the process works. So it's one of those weird things. When you start doing shared services, you have to also have an understanding of who is the elected representative of this area that's going to be making a decision, or do we give up some of our decision-making powers to be part of this? And that's always part of the discussion that occurs with any sort of shared service agreement is what are we giving up and what are we getting in return? And is what we're giving up worth what we're getting in return?
Can I just add something to that? I want whoever is, asking the question to be very well aware that their fire departments, fire districts, they back each other up. They are aware that the city of Mill Valley are as much our clients are. This is all about health, public health and safety. There isn't really, no one is going to stop and say, now let's see, which jurisdiction is this? Oh, yes, no. But if you're in Mill Valley, like my friends live in the city of Mill Valley, they called me about, prevention. So I called our prevention, and the guys then called Mike St. John in the city, and they were over at their house in about half a day. And so it works like that. It's, we have a tremendously cooperative relationship, and everyone counts. It's not, because you may not have a direct elected official, you still have an influence on what happens.
Yeah, no, that is very true. And especially in Marin County, we have a very good working relationship on fire and police, but other services as well. You have a very good working relationship there. So that is a very good point to bring up. That is actually, we're getting to a little bit past the time that we had allotted for this panel. And that was really the last question I had from the membership, or from those that are listening. So we're going to turn it over to, I believe we turn it over to Sashi at this point for the next portion.
Yeah, so let's, I just want to open it up to the attendees. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists that haven't been answered already? If you want to go ahead and put it in the chat. And I don't know if there are any final words that any of the panelists kind of wanted to add, having heard both panels and the questions that are there. Anybody have any further insights that they want to offer?
I just want to say thank you to you, Sashi, and to Jason. And as much as I've been on the panel, I've learned a lot this morning about the individual, what your other panelists had to share. It is so good to hear a well-rounded discussion from every perspective, from the ground up and from the top down. And so I thank you very much for putting this on.
Thank you very much. There are a couple of things in the Q&A that one was just a compliment. Thank you very much. And then another one about working together on microgrids. Heather, I will get in touch with you about microgrids. Thank you very much. So seeing no other questions from the audience, I think, Olivia, why don't we move on to our lessons learned slides and we can kind of wrap this up.
Give me one moment.
Okay, so I think that one of the things we wanted to get across here is that shared services may not result in consolidation, that there are many paths, as Jason outlined, and many ways to share services. And as several of the panelists noted, you have to choose what's appropriate for the jurisdiction, for the community, and for all the stakeholders involved. Another thing that came up repeatedly was the alignment of the stakeholders, the public, managers, the electeds, and labor is critically important to the success of any shared services endeavor. And it's not something that just stops once you've stopped dating and get married. It's something that you have to continue to do. Another thing that came up multiple times was that it's a long road to consolidation. It takes many years to develop the relationships, to resolve the issues along the way. Most of the shared services arrangements that we outlined today were at least 10 years in the making, if not more. And you can see that it takes quite a bit of time and leadership and effort and lots of resolving of different issues to be able to continue beyond that point. Next slide, please. Another lesson learned, it may take more than one attempt to approach, or it may not be possible at this time. Sometimes you put a shared services effort together and it doesn't work? That was a question that was asked by one of our attendees earlier. I don't know if anybody is on the panel that can comment on. I think it was Catherine. What was it? Was it TAM? There was a fire district. That, do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well, actually, we merged with Mill Valley. It didn't merge, but we had a joint powers agreement, a relationship, and it was okay, and then separated again. So this is round 2.
Yeah. Yep. So that is something that can happen. Michael Frank mentioned something with the city of Fremont and the city of Union City. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and you might have to try again, or it may just not be viable. The official LAFCo process is the final step after all the work is done. So the reason that we like to get involved so early on in the process, and like we said, these things are often a decade or more in the making, is to help line those things up. And once the stakeholders, the public, the management, labor, the electeds, everybody is lined up, then the official LAFCo process is that final kind of stamp of approval along the way. Including LAFCo early in the planning process can save you time and money when you go for that LAFCo approval. You may be doing financial assessments. You may be doing various studies. If you're going to be doing studies that are close to the kinds of things that LAFCO is going to be requiring when you come to final approval, and you've done it in a slightly different way, we're going to ask you to redo it the way that we need it. So good idea to get Jason and staff involved early on so that you can save time and money when it comes to the final approval. So those were some of the insights that we kind of took away from this. I want to give a big thank you to all the panelists. There's a lot of collective experience in this virtual room here, and I want to really acknowledge that. I think that it was evident the depth and the experience and the lessons learned from all the different panelists. So I want to thank each of you for being here and for sharing your insights. It was really incredibly helpful. And as Catherine mentioned, I think everybody learned something from this. I also want to recognize our staff, Olivia and Jaren and Jason, for running the show here and keeping us all going. Afterwards, you are going to be getting a survey. If we don't have your email address, some of you who signed up and RSVP'd, we already have your email address. But if you're attending, please email us and we'll add you to our mailing list. And then we'll send you a short survey for today's workshop. We'd love to hear everybody's feedback. We'd love to hear about topics you'd like us to talk about in the future. And we just thank you for attending. And I think that's it. Jason, any other comments? Olivia, anything else anybody wants to add?
No, I just want to once again thank our partnering agencies that helped get the word out about this workshop. It was very helpful. I want to thank the MCCMC, the recently formed Marin County chapter of the Special Districts Association. For any of you that are involved in special districts and don't know who or what they are, you should really find out about them. They're recently formed and are going to do a lot of great work to help special districts out in Marin County. And then also thank the school districts for helping get the word out to their members, even though they're not part of LAFCo. This is still an important subject matter for schools to be talking about as well.
Thank you very much. And we've got Jason's contact information here. Please note his contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out and have preliminary conversations. Invite him to, as we mentioned, your strategic planning sessions, general plan sessions, any working groups. Involve Jason early and he will help save you time and money. So with that, I think we'll close out and thank you to everybody. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event.